Rin and I stood at the edge of the mews, our breath curling in the crisp autumn air. Though Kagari never truly changes seasons, not like other places. It simply layers them, one over another, until the city becomes a patchwork quilt of rain and remembrance. Kaido's mother had vanished as abruptly as she'd appeared, leaving behind only the echo of her melody, a flute's lament that still hung in the air, taunting us like a half-remembered dream. Rin's tail flicked with controlled agitation. We should go back to the workshop. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead. Because when is a story ever just about returning? Or I suggested we could ask Kaido what his mother meant by the stolen thing. Rin groaned so loudly that a nearby lantern flickered. Momo. I waved my hand dismissively. What? It's not like we have anything else to do. She sighed long and dramatic because she hates when I suggest things, but then she said, Fine, but if he says no, we're coming back here and you're going to apologize to me. I gasped dramatically, because when isn't dramatic gasping appropriate in a moment like this? Apologize to you? Never. Rin shot me a glare that could have melted steel, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she turned on her heel and began walking toward our workshop. Though I noticed the way her ears perked forward slightly, as if she were listening for something. I, of course, being who I am, fell into step beside her, my mind racing with possibilities like usual. Do you think it's a treasure? I asked, because when isn't speculation appropriate in a story like this? Rin groaned so loudly that her bookshelf from earlier creaked ominously, but then she said, Maybe or maybe it's something more important. I blinked rapidly, because when isn't blinking rapid appropriate in a moment like this? Like what? She hesitated, then whispered, like the key. A chill ran down my spine, because when isn't a chill appropriate in a story like this? Then Rin sighed long and dramatic because she hates when things get quiet and said, Let's just find out. Well, our workshop was exactly as we'd left it, though upon closer inspection the gears in the walls had turned slightly, as if responding to some unseen rhythm. I told you this city was full of secrets. Rin and I paused in the doorway, our breaths curling in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Then Kaito walked in, not alone but with another figure at his side. A woman, her hair silver-threaded through raven black locks. His mother. But she wasn't smiling this time. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes sharp with something I couldn't name. Not anger, not exactly, but something like urgency. Kaido's ears, both human and cat, twitched slightly as he noticed us, but his gaze was fixed on his mother. Rin stepped forward, because Rin is always the first one to act in moments like this, her tail flicking with controlled agitation. Kaido-san, she said carefully, your mother said something about a stolen thing. Kaido's expression darkened slightly, but he didn't look away from his mother. Yes. His mother exhaled sharply, like a breath held too long finally released, and then she turned to face us. It's time, she said softly, time for the truth. A silence fell over us, one of those moments where the weight of what's to come presses down like a storm cloud. Then Rin sighed, long and dramatic, because she hates when things get complicated, but then she nodded. All right, she said, what is it? Well, Kaido's mother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt in front of the floorboard we'd lifted so many times before. This time, her fingers traced its edges with something like reverence. Rin and I exchanged glances, one that was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Kaido stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. This place wasn't just my mother's workshop, it was a gateway. I gasped dramatically, Because Rin isn't dramatic gasping appropriate in a moment like this. But Rin didn't react. Because Rin is always the one who stays calm in moments like this. The gateway. Kaido nodded. One that led to another world, the one where my mother's work lived on long after she vanished. His mother's fingers stilled on the floorboard, and for a moment I thought I saw her eyes glisten, just slightly, as if she were fighting back tears, or maybe it was just the lantern light playing tricks. Then she said softly, "It was stolen from me, a key that could open the gateway again." Rin's ears flattened against her head, because Rin is always the first one to sense danger, unlike me, who stumbles into it with both paws. "Who took it?" Kaido's mother hesitated, then whispered, "A man I trusted, a man who wanted to use the gateway for something else." I blinked rapidly, because Rin isn't blinking rapid appropriate in a moment like this. But Rin just nodded, because Rin is always the one who stays strong in moments like this. "All right," she said slowly, "we'll help you find it." Kaido's mother turned to face us, her expression a mix of gratitude and something like sorrow. "Thank you," she said softly, "but it won't be easy." I grinned, because if there's one thing about stories like this, it's that the hardest parts are always where the magic lies. "Easy is for cowards," I said proudly, and then, because I am who I am, I added, "Rin hates when I say things like that." Rin groaned so loudly that Kaido's mother's ears twitched slightly, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she just smiled faintly and said, "Let's go." What? The gateway beneath our workshop wasn't like the ones from stories. No swirling portals or blinding light. It was quiet here, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns and the faintest hum of gears turning on their own. Kaido's mother led us forward with a steady hand, her silver-threaded hair catching the light like spun moonlight. Kaido walked beside her, his cat ears twitching slightly, as if they were listening for something we couldn't hear. Rin and I followed, our footsteps echoing in the stillness of the workshop. Then, without warning, the floor beneath us shifted. Not with force, no, this was quieter than that. A soft click, like a lock turning ever so slightly. Kaido's mother gasped softly, and then she was gone, swallowed by the gateway as if it had been waiting for her all along. Rin and I exchanged glances, one that was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then Rin sighed, long and dramatic, because she hates when things go wrong, but she stepped forward anyway, because Rin is always the one who acts in moments like this. "Momo," she said carefully, "stay close." I nodded enthusiastically, because I love being part of important moments. But then my foot slipped on a loose floorboard, because when isn't slipping appropriate in a story like this? And I tumbled forward right into the gateway. Rin groaned so loudly that the gears around us hummed in response, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she just shook her head and said, "Of course it's you." And then she was gone too, swallowed by the gateway as if it had been waiting for both of us all along. Well, the world beyond the gateway wasn't like Kagari, though it felt familiar. The air here smelled of rain and old paper, but beneath that lay something deeper, richer. A scent like memories waiting to be remembered. I stood in the middle of what looked like another workshop, this one filled with mechanical cats that sang, their tails moving in tiny arcs as if they were humming along with some unseen melody. Rin groaned so loudly that a nearby cat startled and bolted into the shadows, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she just turned to me, and I saw the way her tail flicked with something like, "Oh." I gasped dramatically, because when isn't dramatic gasping appropriate in a moment like this? But then Rin sighed and said, "Momo." I grinned, Rin. Then Kaido stepped forward from the shadows, his cat ears twitching slightly, as if they were listening for something we couldn't hear. "Welcome," he said softly, "to my mother's workshop." A silence fell over us, one of those moments where the weight of what's to come presses down like a storm cloud. Then Rin sighed, long and dramatic, because she hates when things get complicated, but then she nodded. "All right," she said, "what do we do now?" Kaido's smile was faint, but it reached his eyes, making them crinkle just slightly at the corners, a sight that made my chest tighten, because when isn't chest tightening appropriate in a story like this? "We find the key," he said, "and then we go home." I gasped dramatically, because when isn't dramatic gasping appropriate in a moment like this? But Rin just nodded. "All right," she said softly, "let's do it." Well, the key was hidden in the heart of Kaido's mother's workshop, a place where gears turned on their own, as if guided by some unseen hand. Kaido led us forward with steady steps, his cat ears twitching slightly, as if they were listening for something we couldn't hear. Rin followed, her tail flicking with controlled agitation, because she hates when things get quiet, while I lingered behind, my mind racing with possibilities like usual. Then Kaido paused in front of a small, ornate box, its surface covered in engravings of cats chasing each other around the sun. Rin gasped softly and took a step forward, because Rin is always the first one to act in moments like this. But then she stopped, because she knew, as I did, that some things are better left unsaid for just a moment longer. Kaido reached out slowly, and when his fingers brushed the box's surface, it glowed. Not brightly, not blindingly, but with a soft, golden light that made the gears around us hum in response, as if they recognized something or someone they hadn't seen in years. I gasped dramatically, because when isn't dramatic gasping appropriate in a moment like this? But Rin just nodded, because Rin is always the one who stays calm in moments like this. "It's here," she whispered. Kaido exhaled sharply, his cat ears twitching slightly, as if they were fighting against something unseen. Then he turned to face us, his expression a mix of determination and something like sorrow. "My mother said this key could open the gateway again," he said softly, "but I don't know what happens after." Rin sighed, long and dramatic, because she hates when things get complicated, but then she nodded. "All right," she said slowly, "we'll figure it out together." I blinked rapidly, because when isn't blinking rapid appropriate in a moment like this? But I didn't argue further. Instead, I just smiled, and for the first time since we'd met Kaido, my heart didn't feel so heavy. Kaido reached into his pocket and pulled out the key, crescent moon-shaped, with engravings of cats chasing each other around the sun. Then he held it out to Rin, because Rin is always the one who acts in moments like this, his voice quiet but firm. "Will you try?" Rin hesitated, but then she stepped forward, her tail flicking with something like resolve. She took the key gently, her fingers brushing its surface with reverence. And then, without warning, the gateway beneath our feet opened. Not with force, not with blinding light, but softly, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Well, the moment Rin pressed the key into the gateway's lock, I saw it. The way time shifted around us like ripples in water. The workshop hummed with something older than memory, and for a heartbeat, I thought I heard my own name whispered on the wind. Kaido stepped forward, his cat ears twitching slightly, as if they were listening to a melody only he could hear. Then Rin turned to face me, and I saw the way her eyes glistened with something like tears, because when isn't tear glistening appropriate in a moment like this? "Momo," she said softly, "I need you to choose." I blinked rapidly, because when isn't blinking rapid appropriate in a moment like this? But I didn't argue further. Instead, I just smiled, and for the first time since we'd met Rin, my heart didn't feel so heavy. What's the choice? Rin hesitated, then said, Do you want to stay here, or go home with Kaido and his mother? A silence fell over us, one of those moments where the weight of what's to come presses down like a storm cloud. Then I nodded slowly, because when isn't nodding slowly appropriate in a moment like this? I think I said softly, I want to go home. Rin's tail flicked with something like relief, and then she turned back to the gateway, her fingers brushing its surface with reverence. All right, she whispered, let's go. Well, the journey home was quiet, though Kagari never truly sleeps, not even at night. The city hums with secrets, its buildings leaning in like guardians waiting to tell their stories. Rin and I walked side by side through the alleys of the Muse, our footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. Kaido followed behind us, his cat ears twitching slightly, as if they were listening for something we couldn't hear, because when isn't cat ears twitching appropriate in a moment like this? Then Rin paused beneath a lantern, its light flickering softly against her silver fur tail. She turned to me, and I saw the way her eyes glistened with something like tears, because when isn't tear glistening appropriate in an epilogue like this? Momo, she said softly, I think I made a mistake. I blinked rapidly, because when isn't blinking rapid appropriate in an epilogue like this? But I didn't argue further. Instead, I just smiled, and for the first time since we'd met Rin, my heart didn't feel so heavy. What mistake? Rin sighed, long and dramatic, because she hates when things get quiet, but then she said, I thought you were impossible to work with. I gasped dramatically, because when isn't dramatic gasping appropriate in an epilogue like this? But then Rin laughed softly, a sound like wind through leaves, and said, But now I realize, maybe impossible was the right word after all. I grinned. Rin. She shook her head, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she just smiled faintly and said, Let's go home. And with that, we walked on, through the Muse, through Kagari, and into whatever came next. Because stories like keys are meant to unlock doors, not just the ones in workshops, but the ones inside ourselves.